that you're here. I'm Edith L. My husband Jesse and I wanted to have this open house to show you that we'd recovered from that terrible flood that we had here last year. Well, I'm sorry that Jesse couldn't join us this afternoon, but he does send his regards. If you were here in western Harris County last December, you'll remember that flood. People now refer to it as the Great Flood of 1935. Oh, it was terrible. It rained for 2 days solid. Buffalo Bayou, that our little Rummel Creek flows into, was 20 feet over its banks. There was 10 feet of water in the house. My grand piano was floating up to the level of the loft. Fortunately, Jesse and I and all of our cats and dogs and chickens were able to climb out onto the roof. And we were finally rescued by my nephew, who came over in a motorboat from Katy Road, traveling over fence tops to pluck us off the roof. Well, a funny thing happened while we were up there. The cutest little pink pig comes swimming by. Well, I scooped him up and put him on the roof with us, and there he stayed for the rest of the time we were up there. Well, I kept him as a pet, and I've named him Noah. Oh, well, the house was full of mud. Everything we had was destroyed. But we were so pleased that the house itself held firm. We'd brought the property a few years earlier, some in 1925, and the rest in 1926. It's 140.86, to be exact, acres. When we first came out here, we traveled by trolley car along Katy Road, and then went through various gates and fields to get to this site. And when I first saw it, I thought it was the loveliest place, where yellow jasmine was climbing to the top of pine trees, and the dogwood and the holly was so numerous. And I loved it. We were living at the time on Park Street, which is close to downtown Houston, and we'd been increasingly upset with the encroachment of the city upon us, and we really wanted to live in the country. Jesse grew up on a farm outside of Hallettsville, Texas, and I love being in the outdoors. So in 1931, we decided to build a house on this property that we had bought a few years earlier. Well, it has been Jesse's lifelong dream to build a log cabin and to live off the land. So he and 3 other men, my nephew, Lawrence Smith, and Mr. Mosley, who was a hand at the dairy, and one other man, can't think of his name right now, built this house. And it's called a house and not a cabin because of its size and, I like to say, sophistication. So they cut down 100 loblolly pine trees from right here on this site, and that's what the logs are made from. The only thing they didn't construct was the chimney and the fireplace. We hired professional stonemasons to do that. Interestingly, the stones are from downtown Houston. They were raising Milam Street to the height of Preston, and in order to do that, they had to remove the curbstones, and we obtained them for our house. And it was completed in 1932, so we haven't been here, very long before this terrible flood happened. Well, let me give you a little bit of my background. I was born a long time ago, in 1884, in Minnesota, which explains why I don't have a Texan accent. My maiden name was Lotz, and I'm of the Pennsylvania Deutsch heritage. When I was young, I studied art, sketching, painting, and I got a little older, I also studied music. I learned how to play the piano, and I sing, and I also compose music. I was able to make a little money toward my college education by singing at various weddings and other events. I then went on to the University of Minnesota, and I studied bacteriology and pathology. I worked in the lab there. After college, I worked at 2 different hospitals in St. Paul. The first one was St. Luke's, and I was able to use my artistic training there. I did medical illustrations of pathological specimens and operations, and I also did clinical diagnosis. I then went on to St. John's Hospital, And it was there that I was helping to do exams for soldiers going off to the war that I realized I wanted to do my part to help in the Great War. So I volunteered for the U.S. Health Services, and they sent me here to Houston, to Camp Logan. Some of you may remember Camp Logan. It was a large Army camp set up where Memorial Park is now. Well, this is in 1918, and there is a terrible flu epidemic going on at the time. So they needed medical professionals to examine the soldiers in the camp. Well, we didn't find any Asian flu in the camp, but later I saw the hospitals were full of patients with the flu and pneumonia, and there was a lot of death, including some of my friends. After the war, I went to work at the Public Service Laboratories in Beaumont, studying the control of malaria and the bubonic plague. There was a doctor who came into Galveston and died, and they diagnosed it with bubonic plague. So they sent me down there for a week to study the rats and the fleas that come in on the ships that can carry the plague. Well, when I came back to my lab in Beaumont, all over my tables were these dead rats for me to examine for evidence of the bubonic plague, which I didn't find any. So I returned to Houston in 1920 to work for the city of Houston as a bacteriologist. And that's where I met my husband, Jesse. He also worked for the city of Houston. He was a milk inspector. Well, we fell in love, and 1 year later we were married. But I didn't tell anyone that we had gotten married because I was afraid they wouldn't approve of a married woman working. Eventually they found out, and I discovered I was wrong. Nobody cared. Jesse's family, however, was not pleased that we had gotten married because I am 10 years older than he is. We continued to work for the city of Houston until we moved out here. And yes, we have been able to live off the land. Before the flood, we had a sawmill, a lumber yard, a dairy farm, and a frog farm. We sold the frogs to various Houston restaurants. After the flood, we had to give up the sawmill along Rummel Creek, but we still have the lumber yard and a small store along Katy Road. Perhaps you've seen it. And we still have the dairy farm. Fortunately, we were able to get the cows out in time. Frogs, however, floated away with the floodwaters. But I think their descendants are here because we have a great many bullfrog tadpoles in both of our ponds. Well, I am thoroughly enjoying living out here in the country. I remember there was this day, not too long after the flood, it was so wonderfully quiet. So I took my easel and my sketchbook and my paints, and I set them up outside, and I began to paint. For too long, here comes this white Brahma bull. Puts his head up over my shoulder, and he's watching me paint. And before too long, he's licking the green paint from my palette. I love being out in the country, getting acquainted with cattle and little animals, turkeys as pets. And we only eat the eggs of our chickens. Oh, there are little foxes and even little pigs as pets. Oh, plum blossoms with their fragrance over all. Grapevines with their fruit tempting birds and animals. I think I'm in heaven. I can forget all about the worries in town and see only the loveliness. Well, I hope you enjoy it as well. Thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your day.